Welcome back, guys. Today's episode, I am sharing 10 most disturbing true Alaskan encounter horror stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. People tend to think lighthouse keeping is lonely work, but I almost looked forward to the solitude. In 1997, I took a government contract to man the Autumn Shoals Lighthouse, tucked about 12 miles off the Washington coast. The island it sat on wasn't even a mile wide. Bare cliffs, shrieking gulls, a small supply shed, and the iron spiral of the lighthouse tower. Supplies came about once every 3 weeks by boat. The rest of the time it was just me, the beam, and the endless tide. I thought I would relish the isolation. For the first few months, everything was as expected. Nights cataloging weather patterns, logging passing ships, fixing lantern mechanisms, and filling the logbook. I read thick novels, cooked canned meals, and let waves and wind sing me to sleep. Then came a night in January that I still can't scrub from memory. Past midnight, while scanning the horizon, I spotted an orange flicker against the cliffside on the far end of the island. A fire. At first I felt relief. It meant someone else was out there. Company, maybe. Marooned fishermen or some passing drifter looking for shelter. But the next morning, when I went to investigate the cliffs, there was nothing. Not ashes, not stones arranged in a fire pit, no footprints. Just seabird droppings and jagged rocks slick with spray. Still, that night at nearly the same hour, the light appeared again. A bit brighter, dancing as though someone was stoking flames. I told myself my eyes were tired or sea haze was bending the glow from my own lamp. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. As nights stretched, the fire kept returning. And worse, when I trained binoculars on the glow, I began to see shapes. 2 figures, tall but bent strangely, swaying like reeds in the wind. They moved around the fire with unnatural grace. Too fluid, too wrong. From that distance, their faces flashed pale when flames licked high, white as porcelain masks. That's when the knocking began. On the 4th night, precisely at 3 in the morning, a reverberating knock rattled through the tower door. Solid, bone deep. I was 2 levels up at the time, but I swear I felt the metal hinges strain. Lantern in hand, I bolted down the spiral stair to fling the door open, but nothing. Only roaring wind and the open ocean. That was the first time the hair on my arms prickled with the certainty. I wasn't alone on that island. Once the knocking began, peace was impossible. Something had set its gaze on me, and I felt it even when I wasn't looking. February bled in with gales and sharp cold, howling through the tower vents at night. The fire on the cliffs never wavered. Sometimes it burned dull, sometimes fiercely, but it never went out. Worse, the lighthouse itself began to betray me. My oil lamp sputtered though it had fresh fuel, canned food spoiled with sickly odor long before expiry, and tools rusted overnight even inside sealed crates. I began hearing footsteps trailing the spiral staircase, wet, bare feet slapping on metal. At first faint, like an auditory trick, but gradually louder and reaching higher up the tower each time. When I scrubbed the prints away by day, they returned worse the following night. Salty, slick, leading further upward, denying me peace. Sleep grew impossible. My journal notes from that period are scribbled fragments. They're climbing. Voices in the fog, like gulls but speaking. The door won't hold forever. One night, through foggy glass, I spotted them closer, no longer on the cliffs, but moving at the edges of the shoreline, wading knee-deep from the tide as though rehearsing an approach. I counted 5 shapes then 8, all swaying, featureless white faces tilting skyward whenever the beam swept across water. Each time the lens rotated and light cut away, they moved forward several feet, jerky but purposeful, like puppets with unseen strings. That night, the knocking on the door became a pounding, rattling bolts loose. It was deliberate. Not wind, not wood creaking. Something, or many somethings, wanted inside. My isolation turned into a cage. The supply boat wasn't due for another week. Radio calls couldn't carry in the storming atmosphere. It was me against whatever creeped around the shoreline waiting for its moment. Then, the birds left. The gulls that circled daily and nested along the southern cliffs vanished overnight. No feathers, no bodies, just silence, heavier than wind. That silence was the worst of all. It meant that whatever lived there wasn't content with watching fires in the distance. It was closing in. February 2nd arrived, heralding the worst storm I'd ever endured. Black skies ripped with lightning and waves that slammed the rocks like battering rams. Water lashed the base of the tower. Thunder rattled glass panes. And fog so thick you could choke on it hemmed me in. That night, they came in force. Between lightning flashes, I glimpsed them no longer confined to the distant shore but gathered en masse at the base of the lighthouse, pale figures wading straight from the surf. At least 12, maybe more. Skin gleamed wet under lightning, smooth and glossy as slugs. Some dragged lengths of kelp or rope behind them. Some craned heads too far back, spines bending unnaturally. My body locked rigid with primal panic. I bolted the iron door, dragged furniture against it, then scrambled up the spirals to the lamp room with wrench in hand. Below, the tower shook as blows hammered the entry. Every strike rattled through stone, mixing with wind until I felt like a shell being cracked open. Then, silence. I dared to catch my breath until I heard it, light as breath on my neck. Footsteps above me. Not below. Not outside. Inside. On the very stairwell approaching the lamp. But no one had passed me. I lifted lantern high and froze as I caught the reflection of a face pressed against the glass inland side, impossibly high, where no one should have reached from outside, skin pale and smooth like stretched wax, pockmarked with pulsing seawater veins beneath. Where eyes should have been, 2 hollow sockets ebbed and churned with sea foam. It leaned hard into the glass until it groaned as if ready to crack, its eyeless sockets boring into me like twin whirlpools. Its mouth never moved, because there was none. I lashed with the wrench, lantern shaking, and darkness collapsed around me as storm gust blew the light out. For minutes, or hours, I cowered in pitch dark, heartbeat drowning out every pound of rain and wave. I must have fainted. When I woke, dawn sunlight filled the lamp room. The storm was gone. The tower looked untouched, but brackish salt water pooled halfway up the stairs, soaking boots and ropes alike. That water couldn't possibly have reached so high. 3 weeks later, I boarded the supply boat as a shell of myself, sobbing into the deckhand's sleeves. They dismissed my story as storm madness, but I know what I saw. When sleep briefly takes me, I still see its pale head pressing against the window glass. Patient, waiting, and I know one night, the beam of that lighthouse will sweep across autumn shoals again, and when it does, it won't be guiding ships. It will be guiding them back. Cautionary thought. If you ever see a light flickering from a supposedly deserted island, turn away. Not every light guides you home. Some lead the things that haunt the dark straight to your door. Most people imagine survival horror happens at sea. The storm, the shipwreck, the sharks. But let me tell you this, the strangest dangers aren't out there in the waves. They are hiding on land where you think you're finally safe. I learned that the hard way on an uninhabited island in 2009. I was backpacking around Southeast Asia with 3 friends, chasing islands away from the tourist traps. We heard about this tiny place off the coast of Malaysia, a crescent of white beach, jungle in the middle, unclaimed and untouched. No permanent population, just sand, shade, and silence. The kind of place travel magazines call paradise. We paid a fisherman to ferry us out in his old skiff. He watched us unload gear, tents, food packs, snorkeling masks, and his expression soured. He muttered something in Bahasa I couldn't quite catch, but when I asked, he only shook his head. No, stay long. Then he left us standing with dunes soft as powdered sugar between our toes. I thought he was just trying to spook the backpackers. The first night was beautiful. Moonlight carved silver paths across the water, the surf softened into a lullaby, and warm breezes kept mosquitoes away. We roasted fish we'd caught and laughed late under the palm trees. It felt as though we'd claimed our own hidden Eden. But the second day, Sophie noticed bones. We were combing the eastern edge of the beach, and half buried in the sand was an odd shape. At first glance, I thought driftwood had washed ashore, but brushing it off revealed fish skeletons twisted into unnatural curvatures, and deeper still, bird bones, thin and scattered like someone had shaken them straight through the sand itself. We assumed predators or storms had scattered the remains, but something off lingered. The bones weren't just broken, they were pitted, riddled with perfect round holes, like acid had dissolved through their marrow. That night we lit a bonfire to shake nerves, but sitting there, I realized the sand around the fire pit wasn't still. Each time I glanced down, grains shifted as if tiny tremors ran underneath. I tried to play it off as the tide's vibration or breezes tunneling, but my chest tightened just watching it. The fisherman's words returned to me. No stay long. By dawn, when one of our tents lay collapsed with stakes pulled under the surface, we knew something beneath the sand was alive. That paradise beach wasn't empty. It was hungry. We tried to rationalize that tent collapse. Maybe bad weather overnight. Maybe one of us didn't anchor it well. But the sand's disturbances grew harder to ignore. Whenever we walked the beach barefoot, we felt subtle softness beneath, like cushioning too loose for compacted earth. And if we stood still for too long, the sand literally started swallowing our heels an inch at a time. Sophie yelped when something slithered over her foot below the grains. She said it felt like thousands of tiny tongues. By midday, I realized the animal life had fully abandoned the main shore. No seabirds scavenging, no crabs zigzagging along tide lines, no shells washed up. An ocean rich with life produced nothing except emptiness here. We decided then to leave as soon as possible, but we were trapped by tide cycles. Our fisherman wasn't coming until the pre-agreed pickup in 2 days, and we had no radio signal. Worse still, our only dinghy had vanished by morning, dragged out by current, or maybe taken by someone who knew the island better than us. The second night was when the sand revealed its appetite in full. We were sitting around another fire when Tom, my best friend, excused himself to grab supplies from his pack lying about 30 feet away. A minute later, I heard him shouting, a strangled, panicked noise. By the time we sprinted toward him, he was waist-deep in sand, not sinking like into water, but dragged downward by invisible teeth. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. Disbelief, terror, then agony as something pulled harder. He clawed at the ground, tossing up sprays of sand, but his fingers scraped only grains that slipped instantly back into place. His screams were awful. Then they cut short as sand rose over his mouth, nose, and finally his face. We dug like maniacs, Sophie sobbing, my nails splitting from scraping. But within a minute, all trace of Tom was gone. Where his body had been was just a smooth beach, flattened by waves, no indentation, no blood. Nothing, just a curve of sand that might as well have always been there. We backed toward the tree line, trembling wrecks. Sophie kept saying over and over, "It's alive, it's alive." And standing there in the moonlight, I saw it, the sand subtly pulsing, expanding fractions of inches in rhythm like the entire island itself was breathing. We weren't camping on solid land. We were standing atop a thing. After Tom vanished, panic consumed us. We screamed for hours into the black ocean, praying some boat might be near enough to hear, but waves drowned us. That night passed with Sophie and I curled in the jungle tree line, flinching at every rustle. Sleep never came. At sunrise, the sand showed souvenirs. Strewn near the spot Tom was taken lay fragments, pieces of bone too porous to be his intact skeleton, riddled with those same neat holes, as though something had sucked marrow through a straw. My stomach rolled, but the message was clear: devoured and discarded. By instinct, we climbed into the dense interior forest. It was thick palms and strangler figs, birds shrieking overhead like they were mocking us for being intruders. At least in the jungle, we weren't standing directly above the creature's dining table. Still, the island was small. Every path circled back to sand far sooner than we wanted. By mid-afternoon, hunger and dehydration pressed us. Sophie broke, sprinting toward the cove to reach tide pools she swore held fresh water. I chased, shouting for her to wait. My feet pounded into the threshold where beach began, and froze. The surface rippled. Not like water, but like something swimming beneath thin glass. Bulges formed across the outer shore, rolling lumps in swift arcs, converging toward Sophie as if drawn to her vibrations. She was screaming by the time I lunged and grabbed her wrist. Her momentum carried her forward another step, grains rising and gripping her ankles like wet cement. She shrieked, clawing my shoulder. I threw myself backward with everything I had, wrenching her loose as grains sprayed upward in a geyser. The sand hissed, audibly hissed. 100,000 grains rasping together, the sound of rattlesnakes woven with whispers too low to parse. We stumbled back into the tree line, tears streaking both our faces. That night was interminable. Every direction was hemmed by beach, living, waiting beach. The island itself wanted us. I held Sophie's hand in the dark, promising rescue, though deep down I doubted either of us would live to see morning. But at dawn, a miracle. The fisherman's skiff appeared on the horizon. He was whistling, casual, as if he'd come for a routine pickup. Sophie and I burst screaming from the trees, waving arms like lunatics. He looked startled, but when our feet hit the shoreline, he yelled, "No run! Walk! Light steps! Walk!" We obeyed whatever instinct kept us alive. We walked calmly across grainy soil that shifted restless under our boots, caught the rope he threw, and scrambled aboard his boat. Only when we pushed away did I dare look back. The beach shuddered in visible waves like something enormous churning below the crust. A human-shaped bulge briefly formed just under the surface, stretching the sand before sinking again. I never saw that island again. I never tried. But to this day, whenever I hear the sound of sand shifting underfoot, I remember the hiss. I remember Tom's scream smothered, and I realize that some islands don't grow from rock. They live, waiting for prey. Final thought: if you ever find an island where bones lie scattered half-buried, leave at once. Paradise is a mask, and sometimes the ground beneath your feet is hungrier than the sea. I've listened to the ocean most of my life. As a marine biologist, I thought I understood the calls of whales, the clicks of dolphins, even the static chatter of shrimp. But during my fellowship in 2013, on a remote research station built on a Polynesian island reef, I learned a truth I wish I could erase. Not every voice at sea belongs to something you should approach. Some voices mimic to lure you in. Our base was small, just 4 researchers studying reef health on an uninhabited atoll. A cluster of palms rose above pale sand and coral-carved lagoons where we ran transects and counted species. Every 3 weeks, a chartered vessel dropped fresh supplies. Between those intervals, we were utterly alone. No towers, no villages, no interaction but each other. Isolation never bothered me. In fact, that fellowship was my dream post. The island seemed alive in its beauty. Lush greens, ribbons of turquoise water curling around us, seabirds circling in eternal patterns. But after nightfall, the stillness was uncanny. Waves hissed against reef edges. Palms clattered with wind, and the world felt hollow. No people. No engines, just us. The first incident happened one quiet evening while I logged fish counts at camp. I heard my brother's voice, faint but distinct, call my name from the lagoon side. Now, my brother was in California, studying architecture, so the sound sent a bolt through me. Yet it was clear. "Anna, come here." I rushed to the shore expecting to see one of the guys joking, but no one stood there. The moon shimmered across glassy water. Mangroves swayed, empty. Still, I swore I could hear footsteps padding into the forest. Later, over dinner, I asked the team if they'd heard someone. They laughed, assumed sunburn and salt had scrambled my senses. But I couldn't dismiss the way my name had been spoken in my brother's exact inflection. Tender, coaxing, urgent. The next night it happened again. This time from deeper in the palm grove. Same voice, clearer, closer. "Anna, it's me." My scalp prickled cold, though sweat beaded my skin. I gripped my flashlight, but when I went to investigate, the beam only cut through tangled fronds swaying with wind. Shadows slipped between trunks as though ducking out of sight. That was the night I realized the island hid more than just coral surveys. Something listened. Something knew me. More than I wanted it to. And that was just the beginning. When the voice returned the third night, I refused to check. I pulled the sleeping bag over my head while the others snored, pressing palms over my ears, but muffled words still reached me, from outside the research hut, moving back and forth. "Anna, come out. I miss you. Why are you hiding? Aren't you glad I came?" I wanted to scream, but fear strangled me. The tone was identical to my brother's. Not just the sound, but his unique catch when he rushed words. Something, or someone, had learned it perfectly. For days I pushed to keep busy. We snorkeled reef transects, tagged species, filed notes. But even underwater, I began to feel eyes hidden in reef caves. Sometimes I swore I heard whispers through my breathing tube, a crackle that spoke my name underneath the hiss of coral fish. By now, I stopped joking with the others. On day 9, Nathan, one of the older researchers, confided first. He admitted he'd been hearing his wife's voice at night, calling from the palm grove with the same longing. "Come here, Nate. Don't you recognize me?" His confession chilled me worse than solitude. It wasn't only me. 2 nights later, Sophie, our botanist intern, vanished. Her bedroll empty by morning, her sandals terribly placed near the grove edge. No note, no shouting, no sign of struggle. Just tracks that wandered barefoot into sand and disappeared beneath drooping fronds. We scoured the forest, crying her name until voices cracked, but the only reply was the same imitation. Her mother's voice echoing between trees, tender and warm where Sophie should have been. Nathan nearly bolted toward the sound, shoulders tensed like a child running home until I grabbed him back. A shadow flickered through the mangroves then, too fast, too tall. A black outline slithered between trunks while whispering words like a possessed record player. "It's me, Sophie. Don't you know me?" We ran back to camp, dragging Nathan, who sobbed as if part of him had died. He tried to explain what he'd been feeling, like the voice was inside his skull, urging trust, weaving such familiarity that ignoring it became agony. By the 11th night, I stopped distinguishing whispers from reality. The palms clicked incessantly, each creak like syllables forming. I caught myself muttering my own name just to soothe panic because I was terrified that if I stopped resisting, I'd answer. The thing on that island wasn't merely imitating voices. It was hunting with them. It was the 13th night when our fragile grip unraveled. Nathan slipped away before dawn. No scream, no panic. Just absence. We found his notes later in the logbook. "She's waiting for me under the palms. I have to see her. Don't stop me." The grove felt malignant without him. Leaves twitched though wind had died. Trunks leaned inward as if to conceal something. We found footprints that stopped dead after 10 paces like he'd merged clean into soil. No broken branches. No body. Gone. At this point, only I and Mark remained. We waited for rescue, huddled near the lagoon with daily rations dwindling. Each night, the voices blossomed from every direction. My brother's laughter, Mark's father bellowing encouragement, Sophie's delighted giggle, all of them layering together until I felt my skull splitting. Mark lasted 2 more nights. I woke to waves lapping, noticed he wasn't in the hut, sprinted to the shore, and saw him walking barefoot into surf, arms wide as if greeting someone he loved. His outline moved calm, trusting, even while water rose up to his chest. I raced screaming, but he never turned. The last thing I heard was his voice echoing back in 2 places at once. Him, and something else repeating him deeper, wetter, wronger. "I'm home, home, home." He disappeared under the surface without resistance. Not drowned, claimed, then I was alone. The final night broke me. My brother's voice came louder than storms, begging me to come into the palm grove, promising warmth, reunion, family. Sob-wrecked, I pressed nails into my scalp to drown it out. But then came another voice, my own, echoing perfectly, calling back from the forest. Anna, over here. Come to me. Something out there wore me. The realization almost tore my sanity. When the supply vessel arrived next dawn, they found me sprawled on the sand, dehydrated, nails torn to bloody crescents. They asked what happened to the others. I just muttered, "The palms, the voices. Don't listen. Never listen." They evacuated me. The island remains off the charts, avoided by fishermen who murmur that its trees house old gods. Even now, settled years later, I sometimes hear it. At night, when wind shakes the blinds, I'll swear my brother's voice floats from the backyard, gentle, coaxing me. I never open the door, because if I do, I don't believe I'll come back inside. Final thought, on deserted islands, the true predator might not chase you. It whispers until you walk willingly into its maw. Remember, not every familiar voice deserves to be answered, especially when it knows your name where no one else should. When you're stranded at sea, the first silhouette of land should bring relief. I promise you, it doesn't always. Sometimes it brings only something waiting. I learned this in 2011 when my fishing boat capsized in a sudden typhoon. 4 of us survived, clinging to a makeshift raft of barrels and planks tied together with rope. For 2 long days and nights, we drifted in endless water, baking under sun, then shivering as stars wheeled unimaginable miles away. Hunger gnawed, lips cracked with thirst. Every thought circled, we must reach land. On the 3rd morning, we spotted it. A low island fringed with palms, halfway submerged reef surrounding a beach that crawled golden beneath blazing sky. We laughed, cried, hugged each other. Paradise. A place to survive until a real rescue came. The tide brought us lazily to the sand by sundown. We collapsed like wreckage ourselves. I remember pressing my forehead into the beach, murmuring gratitude. My friend Elias built a crackling fire from driftwood as the sky turned purple. Birds wheeled and cawed. Everything seemed alive, natural. We ate crabs pried from rocks, burned our skin warming by the fire, and finally passed out, safe on land. But just past midnight, when I woke to stoke embers, I glimpsed the thing that shattered me. Across the shore, sitting neatly at the tide's edge, was our raft. Not broken apart or drifting away. The very same collection of barrels and planks, tied awkwardly with frayed rope, salt-caked askew. It sat on sand like we'd dragged it there, but none of us had touched it. At first, I thought the tide had carried it in, but when I looked closer, I saw them. Figures. Darker than moonlight, silhouettes sitting on our raft like children at a campfire. They had no features, no eyes, just shadows stacked upright with human outlines. And all 5 of them, yes, 5, one more than our group, sat completely still, staring at our campfire without sound. I rubbed my eyes until they burned, but when I looked again, the raft was empty. Still, footsteps pressed into sand along the path between raft and our sleeping circle. Bare feet. Too long. I pretended sleep until dawn. Part 2. The Watching. 480 words. I was too afraid to speak of the shadows that morning. Instead, I blamed exhaustion for what I'd glimpsed. But the island had changed overnight. Gulls that had circled endlessly on day 1 were gone. The air, once hot and floral, carried a sour musk like rotting kelp. 2 of my friends, Tomas and Elias, swore they'd dreamed voices whispering by their ears, coaxing them back to sea. We set about exploring the island for water. Relief, maybe coconuts, but unease thickened quickly. Every trail drawn into the sand behind us seemed to duplicate odd. Instead of 4 parallel tracks, we found 5, sometimes 6. Each footprint resembled ours but stretched slightly longer, heel to toe too narrow, like someone copying human locomotion imperfectly. That night, dread rose into tangible weight. When moonlight struck the ocean, we saw them again. The shadows had returned to the raft, perched perfectly still. Only now, their heads turned in unison toward us. Not the fire. Us. Elias, stubborn to the bone, took 1 step toward them, swearing they might be people needing help. But as he walked closer, all 5 shadows rose with him, mirroring his stride but from the water's side. They never touched the sand. Instead, they glided atop the tide's skin like puppets pulled by strings. Elias froze, then sprinted back, shouting prayers in his tongue until voice broke. The raft itself, our salvation, began to feel like an open coffin sitting at the beach line. We refused to burn it. What if it was needed for escape? Yet each night the shadows multiplied upon it, as if the wood itself carried them. By the fifth night the entire raft thrummed faintly, ropes bowing as if dozens of hands pressed against from beneath. We considered paddling away anyway, desperate. But the moment the raft floated, they'd surely follow. Better to stay on land, but the land wasn't safety. Past midnight once more, the whispers reached us. Not distant, not dreamlike, but pressing against the back of eardrums, my own dead mother's voice crooning softly in Tagalog. Daniel, come back to sea. That night none of us slept. We sat back to back with sharpened sticks around a failing fire, watching as moonlit silhouettes gathered not just by raft but at tree line, as though more had bled onto land. They moved subtly, cocked heads too far, not breathing, patient. My pulse pounded. We were no longer castaways. We were prey in their snare. Part 3. The Last Stand. 515 words. On the sixth morning, we buried Thomas. He'd gone to the beach at dawn to urinate, ignoring our rule to never go alone. By the time we reached him, he was thrashing chest-deep in sand as if chains dragged him from beneath. His screams ripped the air. I grabbed Elias's arm to rush forward, but just then it happened. We watched shadows appear around him on all sides, hands of black mist pressing him down in jerking pulses. Each time he rose, they slammed again until the sand swallowed him whole. All that remained was silence, then a flat indentation that faded before our eyes like nothing had stood there. We didn't speak for hours. By dusk, panic overtook reason. Elias screamed he'd rather fight than wait, so we stacked driftwood and torched the raft, flames rising against sea spray. Smoke curled high, and for a heartbeat, clarity returned. Maybe we'd cripple whatever connected them. But it wasn't so. The fire burned, but shadows didn't. They stayed sitting calmly atop burning planks, cross-legged, faces unreadable, even as the wood cracked beneath. Then, one by one, they slid off and walked across open water toward us. That broke us. Elias sprinted shrieking into the forest. That left just me and Jonah clutching sharpened sticks. Palms thrashed, though no wind blew. Underbrush quivered with hidden pursuit. Then the whispers surged in dozens of voices at once. Our relatives, our children, our former lovers, layered sound flooding skulls until we could barely think. Jonah snapped and bolted to the waves, screaming for his wife. I chased him to the shore, only to watch the sea swallow both him and the figures waiting. His final words echoed in her voice, not his, and then, I was the last. Whether out of stubbornness, madness, or divine mercy, I survived 3 more days, sustained on rainwater, sleeping with my back against trees, warding off sleep with bloody knuckles. Each night the shadows crept closer around me. First 30 feet, then 10, then circling only inches away. Never touching, only looming. At dawn of day 9, I saw a miracle, a passing patrol boat scanning with binoculars. I staggered, screaming into the surf, half expecting to be dragged under then and there. But somehow the figures did not follow beyond the shallows. Perhaps daylight bound them. Perhaps they simply let me go. When men pulled me aboard the patrol, they said I was raving nonsensically, skin slashed raw, eyes bloodshot. I never saw Elias or Jonah again, and I know they didn't drown. They were taken. Sometimes I hear wood creaking like rope-bound barrels or feel a faint whisper ripple with my own name across still seas. I fear the raft still floats somewhere out there, carried from island to island, carrying its shadows, waiting for the next survivors desperate enough to climb aboard. Final thought, if you ever wash ashore and see your raft waiting faithfully at the tide's edge, don't trust it. Some vessels don't save you. They deliver you. I used to laugh at sailors' tales about living islands. A myth, I thought, old legends born from men at sea too long with salt and starvation dulling their senses. But in 2004, while returning from a supply run on the cargo vessel Aurora's Wake, I learned those myths were darker than fairy tales. They weren't allegories. They were warnings. We weren't supposed to land anywhere. The Aurora's Wake ran routes between Micronesia and New Guinea, hauling food stocks, construction supplies, and medical crates. On September 3rd, we hit a rogue storm. Waves mauled us for 10 straight hours. By dawn, we'd lost engines, most of navigation, and 3 men overboard. We were 20 souls adrift, hungry, battered, and desperate. When the clouds thinned, the horizon opened to salvation. An island. Low green ridges, white beaches curling around like an embrace, and groves of palm stitched into hills. A coral lagoon shimmered, beckoning. The anchor dropped, and we cheered like men freed from hell. We hauled ashore in patched lifeboats, dragging crates, building a fire, and patching wounds. It was paradise. Birds shrieked overhead. Crabs scuttled. Coconuts thudded ripe from trees. We talked of waiting until patrols sighted us and, with time, perhaps salvaging the Aurora. Even the captain smiled for the first time in days, but strange details appeared. When I paced the shore, I noticed the horizon tilted oddly, as if island sloped then straightened again, small but perceptible. Later, a group hiked inland past the lagoon and swore the landscape didn't match its silhouette at arrival. Groves had shifted location, ridges unrolled into new valleys. Your mind plays games when you're drained, the captain dismissed. Perhaps it did. I wanted it to. That evening, I woke to a low vibration under my bed of palm leaves, subtle but steady, like a giant heartbeat reverberating through sand. The tide at shore no longer looked normal. It lapped inward, then outward in erratic, unnatural pulse. We told ourselves it was aftershock from storms, that reef waves caused shifting currents. But my eyes caught something they couldn't deny. The horizon sliding imperceptibly, as though the whole land beneath us trembled forward. The island wasn't sitting still. It was moving. We tried to ignore it the next day, but the island kept reminding us. Birds wouldn't land. Entire flocks veered in last-second arcs, circling without perching in branches. Fish avoided the lagoon, leaving traps empty. Even palms swayed against wind's direction, bending toward some invisible center. Tomas, the ship's electrician, was first to say the forbidden thought. This isn't an island. We're on something alive. Everyone laughed him down. But his words stuck like hooks. How else could we explain the ground's rhythm? It wasn't earthquakes, it was breathing. The kind that shuddered faint and deep, sometimes pausing, sometimes accelerating wildly until sand trembled. Then came the first disappearance. Carlos wandered into the inland forest, searching coconuts. He never returned. We combed the grove, but found his sack and machete lying neatly against a trunk, abandoned. No drag marks, no blood. Just absence and silence pressing heavier than waves. That night another change came. The lagoon shifted. I swear upon my life, when dusk fell, the very shape of the bay had curled differently. Where previously we'd anchored 2 life rafts in calm water, we found them pitched against reef rocks as if shore itself had rotated. At first, the captain cursed tides. Then he shut up quick when we all realized something horrifying. Our lifeboats weren't destroyed by storm nor poor anchoring. They were crushed, hulls flattened inward, as if something had intentionally closed around them. Panic overtook our camp. The ground shook violently after midnight, shaking not like quakes but convulsions from something shifting beneath us. Palms toppled. Crabs scattered yelping noise. In the distance, hills rippled under moonlight like the arched back of a surfacing whale. We heard groaning sounds too, immense, resonant, organic. Half the men demanded immediate escape. Where to? The cargo ship remained adrift, engines dead. Our rafts smashed. Options dwindled with light. Another problem emerged in morning. The shoreline where we'd landed no longer existed. Sand ridges closed inward, curling into smooth, unbroken skin of beach. The landmarks we used, a fallen log, a jagged coral spur, gone, replaced by fresh terrain as if the island had rewritten itself overnight. Worse, by compass, we were now drifting several kilometers south of where charts placed us. We weren't camped on a continent fragment. We were clinging like barnacles to a thing crawling slowly across the ocean, and whatever path it took was not for our safe journey. By day 3 ashore, fear escalated into horror. The ground swelled at intervals, rolling underfoot like waves. Some men fell, cracking wrists. Groves bent and righted with the rhythm. We begged the captain for guidance, but his face sagged. He'd stopped pretending. Nightfall brought screams. Thomas, who first suspected truth, bolted from camp raving, "It's turning! It's turning!" I chased him into brush, branches lashing skin. When I found him again, he stood in moonwhite clearing, head tilted, then ground collapsed. Sand peeled downward like muscle pulling open. A cavern yawned, lined not with stone but slick, glistening tissue pumping fluid. The smell hit, stinking iron, wet blood. Before I could grab him, vine-like tendrils lashed from crevice, coiling Thomas and jerking him straight down. He shrieked once, then gone. Cavern sealed shut. Ground smoothed pristine again, I staggered back retching. There was no doubt left. Under our feet was an enormous creature masquerading as land, shifting skin to mimic beaches, raising foliage like hair. We were nothing but insects eating crumbs on its back. The following day, more men disappeared during exploration. Always the same. Stepped too far, vanished screaming as Earth flexed and devoured them. The survivors clung around fire, refusing to move, praying rescue might come. By afternoon, sky filled with black clouds, not atmospheric. Hundreds of seabirds above, circling but refusing to land as though warning us. In shadows of sun between clouds, I realized horizon no longer stretched flat. It bulged. Rose, curled steadily upward in massive curve, a giant spinal ridge surfacing from depths. The island was surfacing further, rising, becoming mobile in earnest. We saw it then, an eye the size of our shore lagoon, half-lidded, pulsing amber emerging out past reef. It blinked slow, lazy, utterly aware, and worse, it rolled toward us, panic ignited. Men scrambled to lash together wreckage of crates, anything that might float. The captain whispered prayers, eyes vacant. I dove into water with 4 others clinging wood slats. Behind us, ground convulsed louder than thunder. I glanced back only once. Our island heaved tall, massive carapace plates rising from ocean like mountain peaks, forests clinging as moss. From its flank unfurled tendrils that looked like land ridges unrolling into appendages. It wasn't an island at all, but a leviathan older than maps. We rowed with bare hands until salt split skin. By some divine providence, we were spotted days later by a shipping lane. Out of 20 men, 7 remained. Rescue officers dismissed our ramblings. Stress delirium, starvation madness. They called our moving island a myth. But sailors whisper even now about strange uncharted land masses that appear then vanish days later, lurking beneath waves. I believe them, for I still dream of its amber eye watching from the deep, patient as tides return. Final thought, an island should stay where it is. If you ever see a shoreline that wasn't there yesterday, resist salvation. Because maybe that land isn't Earth at all. I used to dismiss ghost stories of old ritual sites. I thought they were colorful folklore tossed at tourists for a few extra bucks. That was before the summer of 2016, when I joined 2 fellow anthropology postgrads on an uninhabited Polynesian island to research pre-colonial markings. Our mentor back at the university had hinted that scattered references described sacred stones on an island left alone by locals for centuries. The fishermen said the place was cursed, tapu. They wouldn't even sail within sight of it. We thought it was the perfect field opportunity. The island itself was tiny, no bigger than a mile across. Thick jungle interior, ambient screech of cicadas, shoreline glowing with pristine reefs. But what struck me most upon arrival was the silence of larger life. No seabird flocks circling, no lizards skittering, no wild pigs rooting through brush. Just emptiness. We trekked inland within the first hour, machetes clearing vines. Then we saw them, stones, giant basalt slabs, sharpened and angled in deliberate shapes, carved with spirals and runes too weathered for accuracy. The stones were set in perfect circles, concentric rings 90 feet wide, surrounding a cracked altar slab at middle. It wasn't haphazard. It was deliberate architecture, the kind that radiated weight like a gravity separate from Earth. My heartbeat quickened, not purely from awe. Standing there, I felt watched. We sketched, photographed, built makeshift camp near Outer Circle. But the local superstition gnawed at me. Back home, old professors warned, when locals refuse to step on an island, you ought to wonder why. Yet we chalked it all up to folklore. That night, sleep proved impossible. The stones seemed to hum faintly beneath moonlight. Not an audible noise exactly, more like vibration shivering bone marrow. I tossed, eyes bleary, then staggered up for water. That's when I noticed. Our camp stove had shifted by 3 feet. Shovels, journals, even boots sat lined neatly beside the altar stone we hadn't dared touch. I thought my colleagues were playing tricks, but both swore come morning they hadn't left slumber. That's when the real fear began. By afternoon, each of us swore we'd seen shadows coil at our periphery, darting between the stones as though hiding. Each time we turned, nothing stirred. But, always at nightfall, we heard the humming grow louder, patterned, rhythmic. It didn't take long to realize the stones weren't mere architecture. They were instruments, and something, or someone, was tuning them awake. On our second night, paranoia bloomed into terror. The vibrations grew clearer, aligning with heartbeats syncing in unnatural cadence. Around midnight, suspended jungle air pulsed like a drumbeat radiating from the inner altar itself. My colleagues and I sat frozen, flashlights trembling, swearing shadows moved through stone gaps with fluid shape. Then came the chanting. I'll never forget it. At first faint, then swelling, hoarse guttural tones entwined with soprano wails, voices we couldn't place. Men, women, children, all intoning in tongues older than recorded history. And yet none of it echoed like air. The sound crawled directly through the ground. Against every instinct, we stumbled into the inner ring to investigate. The altar was slick with fresh streaks across its cracked surface. At first, I thought water or humidity or algae. But when my flashlight beamed across, crimson glimmer told the truth. Blood. But whose? We were the only people on the island, no cuts large enough for such spillage. No human could have lain across slab unnoticed. And worse, it was warm. Touching fingertip revealed fresh wetness, just spilled. My colleague Julia whispered shakily, "It's a sacrifice." We fled back to camp, but our equipment betrayed us. Our radios flickered nonsense static, each burst spelling syllables like whispers, "Stay. Remain. Yours." Around 3 a.m., panic overtook us fully. We packed, intending to flee to our dinghy by moonlight, but the jungle resisted passage. Roots shifted where there'd once been path. Vines knotted instantaneously as though living walls sought to herd us back to stones. Then we heard dripping ahead. When the light cut through, we froze. A fresh trail of blood spattered along our escape route leading directly back to the stone ring. And between trunks loomed figures, shapes, gaunt, draped in long moss that concealed faces, eyes gleaming white. They didn't move like people. They swayed, tilting asynchronously with each heartbeat thrum of stones. We collapsed to ground, gulping prayers. But the figures only gazed, never speaking, as though measuring us. Then, one by one, they faded into tree shadow. We barely slept. The island itself wanted us here. And whether myth, spirit, or God, the ritual stones were demanding their offering. By the third day, panic surged into madness. No boaters came near. Our radio batteries drained mysteriously. Food molds appeared overnight. Still, the chanting persisted, louder each dusk. Julia broke first, claiming she understood them. She said the voices promised reward, knowledge, eternal clarity if she only lay down on the table. I begged her not to, wrestled her half the night from altar steps. Her eyes no longer held recognition. They gleamed fanatical. On dawn of fourth day, I woke to shrieks. Julia was gone. We sprinted into the circle. She was splayed across altar stone, wrists open, blood sluicing grooves carved into slab channels. The spirals glistened like veins, sucking her essence into earth. Above her, in shimmering pall of heat mirage, we saw them. Dozens of shadow-thin figures encircling ring, arms lifted in vibrating unison. They weren't human. Their limbs bent the wrong way, fingers too long. Her mouth opened in scream, but sound didn't come. It poured from stones instead. Her agony melded into chants, feeding pulse that rattled air until we couldn't stand upright. We yanked her body free, but too late. Her eyes stared glassed, veins empty. The altar glowed faint scarlet. Before leaving, one figure turned its eyeless head directly at me. Without lips, without face, I still felt the whisper, "One has been given." But balance seeks more. We bolted, dragging her body, clawing through vines somehow loosened now that price was paid. We collapsed on beach until dawn, soaked in terror. Dinghy still waited. How we found it intact, I'll never know. Perhaps permission was granted. We sailed, trembling back to Main Islands. Fishermen saw Julia's corpse, shook heads gravely, muttering, "One was taken." Now they rest a while. They refused detail. When we reported, authorities dismissed truth. Heat, exhaustion, hallucination, suicide. But the villagers refuse proximity to that island, and years later, I believe them. My nightmares replay the chant syncing with my pulse, body swaying. Sometimes, worse, I hear Julia's voice carried faint as wind. Lay down on the table. I'll never return, though part of me knows the stones haven't forgotten my defiance. That pact wasn't truly satisfied. Final thought, if you stumble on an island with standing stones carved into spirals, do not camp. Do not touch. Because those designs aren't decoration. They are mouths waiting to drink. My grandfather always muttered about his wartime service in the Pacific, but he wasn't the type to embellish. He was a stoic man, steady as a carved stone. That's why, when I found myself deployed years later for a marine survey on a remote Micronesian island in 2002, I understood the shiver that ran through me when locals whispered the name and shook their heads. The old people said the soil swallowed men. We were a small research team sent to catalog remnants, sunken ships, rusted anti-air emplacements, possibly even abandoned bunkers. Our employers wanted photographs and tagging for historical preservation. Nothing supernatural, nothing dangerous, just history. The island was smaller than expected, a lump of jungle and rock ringed with reef, sand baked under relentless sun. But walking inland, the mood changed quickly. Vines draped like nooses from trees, cicadas shrilled to near maddening pitch, and in strange pockets, silence dropped like a gavel. We found the main bunker on day 2. A moss-slick entrance, concrete barely visible beneath green overgrowth. Rusted steel doors sagged half open as though waiting. The interior dark, cool, and wet-echoing. War relics. Nothing more, I told myself. Inside, carved steps descended toward a main chamber. Our flashlights revealed intact bunks, rotting uniforms, personal effects from long-forgotten soldiers. Helmets, flasks, prayer beads, even dusty playing cards. Everything preserved in eerie stasis, like the men had only just stepped away. But something felt wrong. Not just abandonment. Presence. The air seemed heavier with each step downward. Breathing went shallow, not from mold, but pressure. Like the mountain itself pressed its chest against intruders. That first night, we set camp just outside. I woke to voices. Faint, muffled in staccato Japanese. My first thought, recordings, a trick of environment. But the voices rose into frantic shouting. The kind of battle orders barked in panic. Machine gun bursts echoed too. Yet our recorders caught nothing. Morning shed no explanation. My colleagues dismissed it. but when I mentioned the words I recognized, a barked taike, brace for impact, they quieted. None of them spoke Japanese. It hadn't been imagination. We pushed deeper into the bunker next day, and that's when the echo changed. It wasn't residual sound. It was answering us. The bunker sprawled further than we guessed. Corridors branched like ribs, lined with rusted hooks that once held rifles. We traced water-stained maps, found a mess hall with bowls fused in decay, but at every turn, sound followed. Boots striking stone, breath huffing just behind us. Once, while photographing, the flash revealed something horrifying. Outlines, blurred but distinct. 7 men sitting at mess table, uniforms shredded, heads snapping toward me. Yet in normal light the benches were empty, eerie detail amplified. The stink of cordite hung as if from ongoing firefight, even though decades had passed. Faint smoke curled at tunnel edges. I kept insisting to colleagues we should leave, though greed for discovery pulled them deeper. By day's end, one of us was gone. Miguel, our linguistics grad, vanished between chambers. His pack lay on ground, recording device running. On playback, his last cries blurred into static, then voices overlapping him, gruff Japanese commands, and under that, terrified English, "Help me, help." We never found Miguel. Night fell heavy. Within our tent, walls reverberated with metal rattles, grenade pin jingles. The smell of rice broth wafted fresh, though none cooked. I woke again to whispers around perimeter. My name in thick accented imitation. Every instinct screamed not to answer. Then came marching, measured, hundreds of boots stomping earth, circling camp invisible yet undeniable. At dawn, we argued violently. 2 men wanted out immediately. The lead researcher insisted we'd ruin opportunity. So we split. I and one other, a medic named Lara, agreed to keep pushing inward. Maybe, I thought, proof might validate nightmare. Mistake. The lowest chamber opened to something preserved far too clean. Ammunition boxes still stacked in perfect rows. And at center, a shrine. Likely soldier-built, rough wood engraved with kanji prayers, incense bowls still filled. Only problem, one bowl smoldered faintly. Fresh. We were not alone. Behind us, rhythmic sound rose. A column of soldiers appeared in corridor, translucent, hollow-eyed, uniforms shredded, rifles slung, their faces locked in silent war shriek. They didn't move around us like illusions. They marched through us. I swear, as one passed through my chest, cold fire scraped lungs raw. Lara collapsed, coughing blood. Every hair on my body stood. That bunker wasn't hollow. It was still manned. We stumbled out dragging Lara, sanity shredded. The tunnels around us fizzed with phantoms. We saw firefights played endlessly. Men exploding apart in shrapnel bursts. Nurses dragged screaming into shadows. Grenades rattling, then evaporating with no scorch. War on loop. By noon, we found something worse. A bricked-off corridor gaped partly open. Inside were skeletons piled high, Japanese, American, even civilian bones. Bullet holes scarred them all. Executed prisoners sealed inside. And faint moans still rose from empty skulls, as if the dying breath had never stopped. Lara begged me to leave. But outside, jungle thickened unnaturally, paths shifting as if to deny exit. It kept funneling us back toward bunker mouth no matter how we turned. That night, huddled against cliff edge, I realized we weren't free. Shapes lingered at jungle fringe, uniformed shadows still patrolling, hollow sockets scanning. The war never ended here. Lara deteriorated. Her cough became gurgle. She whispered she saw bayonets circling her when none were there. I pressed wet cloth to her lips, but she stiffened. A blade extruded straight through her chest, metal that dissolved into air yet left real blood. She gasped once, dead in my arms. I ran blindly. Through vines, over stone, feet shredded, lungs screaming. Every step accompanied by phantom footfall behind me. Commands barked inches from ears. I collapsed half delirious on shore and saw boat lights. Somehow, fishermen, brave or foolish, had ventured close despite taboos. They hauled me in babbling nonsense. My only words, bunker, still fighting. They crossed themselves, sped off without hesitation. Doctors later called my story trauma-born hallucination, dehydration, night terrors amplified by historic setting. They never explained the burns on my chest in perfect shape of rising sun insignia, nor did they explain blood tests that showed cordite traces 3 decades obsolete. I never returned, but maps still mark that island as uninhabited. Locals still steer wide, repeating, soil that swallows men. And I know, somewhere in that dripping darkness, the soldiers still march, still kill, still die, endlessly, forever, because the war never ended in that bunker. Final thought, when you find old ruins on forgotten islands, sometimes you're not excavating history. Sometimes you're stepping straight into a war that hasn't stopped yet. Be careful with bunkers. Some battles echo forever. I grew up in the Philippines, where fishing is the lifeblood of whole villages. I've been on the water since I could walk, learning currents and stars the way others learn their neighborhoods. But there's one island cay I'll never sail near again, because in 2015 I saw what happens to those who linger there. The locals always whispered that Cay Sulong, just a half-mile of white sand and stunted palms, was unlucky. Fishermen told stories of nets tearing unexpectedly, boats vanishing without trace, and worst of all, families losing men whenever they camped overnight to fish at its reefs. They said the cay was abandoned by the living and owned by the Swallower. I thought old superstition controlled by fear of reefs. Still, curiosity tugged. So when 3 of my cousins proposed we camp there during dry season and overnight to haul bigger catch, I agreed. We figured the stories were just deterrents to keep rival fishermen away from fertile waters. Greed makes you blind. We arrived late afternoon, dragging boats onto sand that glittered copper with sunset. The cay seemed harmless, just a stretch of dune, scattered driftwood, one thicket of palms. We laughed, built fire, shared dried fish, and joked that the Swallower could try us if it dared. But there was a wrongness I can't quite describe. The tide lapped as usual, waves foaming against reef edge, yet there was no sound of seabirds. Not one. Fishermen know to read skies by bird flights. Here, the sky was void. As dusk bled in, I felt uneasy tracing the beach. Old campfires dotted sand in half-burned rings. Scattered mats of rotted cloth crumbled to touch. Rusted hooks lay abandoned. Families had been here before, many times, but they'd left in a hurry. That night, sleep teased me but never settled. The air was too heavy, thick with brine, metallic like quarters on the tongue. Past midnight, I stirred to voices outside. Not unfamiliar. The voices of my late father and uncles, arguing low in the dialect they always used while fishing. Their tones curved clear from the tree line. My cousins cracked eyes wide at same moment. They heard too, but then came another sound. A wet dragging, like ropes pulled through surf. Coming closer, and we all knew this wasn't just a ghost story. Something older awaited in that cay. We crept from our shelters and huddled near dying embers. The voices grew louder, so familiar it hurt. They beckoned by name. My father's voice rasped with the same old cough. My uncle barked commands with drunked edge, just as in life. But their footsteps were wrong. Too many feet, too heavy, slapping wet upon sand. When I held a lantern forward, light barely cut 10 feet before snuffing faint in mist. Shapes moved beyond edge, lanky, distorted, their backs bowed by nets slung heavy. We stayed silent, but one cousin, Joel, was reckless. Tears streaming, he cried, "Tate!" and staggered forward. That broke the rules. From mist surged figures draped in shredded fishing nets, faces obscured but glistening with pallor. Their mouths gaped wide, unhinged, jawlines stretched like nets torn at seam, and within each cavity I heard ocean rushing, like they carried the surf inside their lungs. Joel screamed as they descended, dozens of hands tipped with sharpened bone hooks. They didn't strike. They hauled, dragging his body backward as though stringing catch in lines. We sprinted to help, but the nets closed. One swipe shredded his arm like fish gills. Then they vanished together into tide, leaving only shredded cloth tumbling. Panic shrieked through us. We considered launching boats for escape, but something shifted offshore. The reef vibrated with hollow drumming, a low hum rising like a voice from deep. We ran instead to the grove, hoping shelter. Wrong choice. Piles of bones littered each root, jawbones, ribs, finger phalanges knotted by twine, and shackled across trunks, hanging nets thickly crusted with dried marrow. This was the swallower's larder. Generations of men fed into nets until family trees snapped. One cousin collapsed, muttering prayers. The other swore we must pay respect, to leave an offering before dawn. But what does an ocean god accept? All night, shadows circled camp. Nets hissed, hish, hish, as if dragged across sand. We stood awake, gripping hooks for defense we knew was meaningless. The K reeked not just of salt, but of hunger. We were caught in its debt, and dawn would not save us. The moment sky lightened faintly, we bolted for boats, but the tide had changed. Not receded, vanished. Entire sea around, K stretched back as if island lifted. Reefs jutted naked under miles of exposed mud flats. Our boats lay splintered on dry rocks, smashed apart not by waves but as if crushed between giant hands. Then came the sound. From depths beyond, a hollow bass moan shivered the earth, rising to wail across open flats. The swallower did not allow departure. The ground trembled and shapes rose from muck. Dozens, maybe 100. Dead fishermen, waterlogged, skin pale blue, lips sewn by string. They shambled, dragging nets, their eyes empty, yet each step synchronized, like one tide pulling all. One cousin broke. He threw himself down, crying, "Take me, not him!" The figures obeyed instantly. Nets flew wide, cocooning him in seconds. He vanished, screaming into surf that wasn't there, swallowed by mud itself. I grabbed remaining cousin, dragging him toward far end of K. But everywhere nets slithered across sand like living tendrils. Each snagged toes and wrists slicing. His scream rose when hooks tore cheek from jaw. I pulled harder, but the net yanked him backward so hard I heard bone crack. He disappeared too. Alone, I blundered across barren flats, lungs searing. Shadows pursued, nets swaying side to side. Yet, by wild luck or mercy, the tide roared back suddenly, walls of water crashing over reef. The risen dead halted as water engulfed them. I clung to palm trunk, salt-stinging eyes. When spray cleared, the figures were gone. I never saw cousins again. Coast Guard later found me delirious, dehydrated, and alone. My testimony was written off as shock hallucination. But villagers only shook their heads grimly. The swallower demanded men, they told me. It always does. Now I no longer fish offshore. I quit seas entirely. I hear enough when I sleep. The crackle of nets dragging across sand. Faint voices of my father calling from fog. The K still sits waiting, they say, uninhabited. But boats that drift too close never return. Final thought, if you find a barren campfire ring on some forgotten K, don't stay to fish its waters. Some islands collect more than nets full of fish. They collect men, and they never return them whole. In 2018, I took a contract aboard a private yacht, a wealthy Australian couple touring scattered Micronesian atolls. I worked as a deckhand, fixing small mechanisms and helping steer through reefs. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept me close to the ocean I loved. Around our second week at sea, we reached an isolated atoll uncharted on most maps. Pale sand stretched like bone under brutal sun, a luminous lagoon in its hollow center. We anchored temporarily, intending to explore and collect a few shells for the guests. The yacht owner, Mark, went ashore first. I followed with supplies. The beach felt strange the moment my boots sunk in. Softer than expected, almost sponge-like, with each step reclaiming itself instantly. No birds cried. No crabs skittered. Silence thick as wool. Mark was unimpressed. Pretty, but barren. Let's get lunch. He wandered inland with his wife while I stayed on shore to gather driftwood. That's when I saw it. At first glance, I thought a tarp or sail had washed ashore, an unfurled sheet of leather tangled in driftwood. But the closer I came, the more dread tickled my spine. It wasn't cloth. It was skin. Pale, yellowed by salt water, it stretched end to end of a timber frame like it had been placed deliberately. What paralyzed me wasn't just the size, at least 7 feet tall, limbs proportioned as human, but the emptiness. It wasn't a body. It was just the skin, completely hollow. Worse, the surface twitched faintly, jerking in breeze not strong enough to move it. I bent closer, gagging at smell of rot and brine. Then I saw chest cavity expand ever so slightly. Contract. Expand. The skin was breathing. I stumbled backward, choking bile. Mark and his wife returned immediately, scoffing at paranoia. They laughed it off as odd marine animal remains. But in the pit of my chest I knew flesh when I saw it. Human. That night we camped on shore despite my protests. The owners drank under stars while I lay awake. And when moonlight glazed the skin, I swear to God it shivered, jerked like a muscle memory. Sand around it buckled outward, grains shifting to accommodate what was still alive within. Something had shed that skin. And in the dark, I feared it wanted another. Dawn didn't bring relief. Waves dragged high tide over driftwood, but the skin remained untouched by salt, refusing to float off. It clung to that timber scaffold as if glued by invisible hand. Mark insisted we carry it back as souvenir. Against my protests, he and his wife pried frame up while I stayed frozen. The texture made them curse. It stuck to palms like wet leech flesh. They laughed, but unease flickered across even their smug faces. It was too heavy, too pliant, not dried, not dead. By midday, strange details poisoned our nerves. Their skin, Mark and his wife's, began prickling like sunburn despite wearing long sleeves. Red welts formed in rings across their arms, oddly circular, almost as though suction cups pressed. By afternoon, they scratched raw until blood beaded. Allergy reaction, they shrugged nervously. But I knew no allergy moved in symmetrical patterns that perfect. That night the real horror bared teeth. I woke to a rasping noise from shoreline. Creeping closer, I froze. The skin was gone from its frame. Instead, something stood upright at surfline, empty, hollow. A 7-foot silhouette of skin stretched taut, its hands dangling limp. Chest caved inward, and yet it breathed with steady rhythm, air sighing through seams. Worse, inside that hollow shell something crawled. Not muscle, not bone, a swarm. Thousands of translucent eel-like worms writhing back and forth, filling cavities, pushing against inner membrane to mimic movement. The skin wasn't a corpse. It was a puppet. Mark staggered awake behind me, scratching mad. "What's wrong?" he hissed. When he saw, he laughed bitterly, perhaps to mask terror. A trick of light, the skin husk turned its head toward us. Empty sockets flexed. Flesh slumped forward. Hands jerked wide like nets opening. Mark screamed, collapsing. His arms and chest bulged. The welts exploded outward, worms boring through his pores. He shrieked, writhing, gagging on mouthfuls of pale tendrils. Within moments he collapsed silent, his body convulsed before falling still. And then I watched the same worms abandon him, wriggling back across sand into the skin husk. The husk straightened, full again, taking his height. His shoulders. Could it grow by wearing men? Mark's wife fled, screaming into tree line. Her shrieks ripped, then gurgled out. I never saw her again. I alone remained with that hollow figure standing by surf. My dead crewmate's form sagged inside translucent sack. Eyes cavity fixed on me. Silent. Measuring. By dawn, it returned calmly to frame and lay against driftwood. Waiting. After what I saw, every instinct screamed to flee. But our yacht sat anchored too far for one man to paddle alone. Mark held keys to radio and engines. I faced two choices, stay and fight fate, or risk solution. I approached husk by day, spear gun clutched. Up close, the thing lay slack as if dormant. Its seams glistened with thin mucus. I thrust spear deep through chest. Fluid gushed black, but worms spilled, squealing like wet wires severed. The husk jolted sideways but didn't die. It simply deflated, sagged against itself. By dusk, the hole had sealed. It couldn't be killed with tools. That night, I barricaded in dinghy. Waves rocked gently. The silence thickened until, splashes, I jerked awake. From shoreline, the husk walked straight across lagoon surface, feet not sinking. Worm swarms writhed within, limbs jerking marionette-like. It reached boat edge, leaned down over me, its empty socket inches away. From flat cavity poured sound, Mark's voice, his laugh, his exact intonation saying, "Come, friend, help me." I nearly leapt overboard into teeth of sea. Somehow, adrenaline broke paralysis. I swung oar blindly, knocking husk back into water. It didn't sink. Figures submerged, worms lit phosphorescent in thousands. Then husk rose again further out, drifting until light erased it. By dawn, I'd decided. I cut anchor, let currents drag yacht out. Miraculously, by noon, a patrol ferry spotted distress flare. They hauled me wild-eyed aboard muttering skin with no bones, worms inside men. Crew looked horrified. They said nothing but whispered at port that I'd seen it. Doctors dismissed me as another burnout mariner. They didn't explain welts still along my chest weeks after, the same ring-shaped marks Mark suffered, nor how my hairline itched, bulging lumps writhing briefly beneath scalp before vanishing. Years later, I can't bear coastlines. Shell textures turn stomach, nets terrify me, because I know it lives still. Islands always change shape, sand mounds, driftwood shifting. And maybe, just maybe, one night that skin puppet will wash ashore again near me. It breathes. It waits. If you stumble across flesh stretched like sailcloth on a beach, don't touch. Don't breathe near it, because it isn't dead. It's looking for someone to wear.